the river that is prone to a process called erosion, which is a physical process of removing the material from the stream bank, causing the stream bank to oversteepen, slough into the river, and that material is then now carried downstream, which is often deposited by Main Street there. The problem is that when on top of those stream banks you have trees and other large woody material, that is also recruited into the stream and then carried down all the way to Main Street, leading to that obstruction that was seen in 2006. So this map is an exhibit of where we found flood debris sources within the watershed, starting at Mostert Road and going all the way down to the confluence with West Branch. Red being extreme, and there's some quantitative metrics that some guidelines are out there about how to determine the stability, the technical stability of the stream bank, and then also the river's ability to erode that stream bank. And that is also, those guidelines were used to come up with these ratings for flood debris sources. So red is extreme, orange is very high, and yellow is high. What to note here is, here's the abandoned drinking water reservoir that's up through here. And then downstream of that, about 1,500 feet, is an old abandoned dam. And what you're looking here is you're looking downstream, and that's the left bank or dam part. And this continues on all the way to the right by another like 150 feet or so. And upstream of this, between here, you see a major source of debris. And often with dams, one will find instability immediately upstream and downstream of the dam. There's some hydraulic processes that happen when a dam is put in that causes instability downstream, oversteepening of banks, recruitment of trees and logs, and so it's not a surprise that a big chunk of our flood debris sources in Steel Brook come from between those dams and just downstream. So in the report you can read about our different mitigation solutions, either going up into the watershed itself and shutting down those flood debris sources at their banks, at their sources, which is using either large rock, riprap, logs with root wads, bioengineering, a combination of those approaches. We also have a discussion on a debris basin. And what a debris basin is a facility that stops the bed load and the trees from starting to deposit in areas where we don't want it to, aka the Highway 10 bridge. And we encourage those debris sources to get trapped up in a non-sensitive area, and we had proposed using this historic dam site as a sub-regional trapping facility. The benefits of that is generally a less costly solution because you're just working at one area, easy at construction access to that particular location. The drawback is that it needs maintenance. The debris basin is only as good as well as it's maintained, and once it fills up with debris, the debris's got to be removed, placed someplace else, and so it can capture more debris again. That's a long-term maintenance cost. That has to be part of the discussion, and that's talked about in the report. As opposed to going up into the watershed and fixing the eroding stream banks, stream bank by stream bank, which is the permanent solution to do that, because then you shut off the source at the debris at its source, but that is more costly because it's a trickier construction access, and also you're going to get in the river over longer periods of time. There's the hybrid approach of doing both, one putting the debris basin in, capture stuff there, as the long-term management plan is to shut down these flood debris sources through here. So these are all mitigation solutions that were discussed in the report and run through that prioritization matrices there. Before I leave Steel Brook, one thing that was different from for the Flood Commission members that are here from the previous report, we were asked to take a look at Woolerton Bridge, and we looked at the clear water conditions of Woolerton Bridge. So that was an addition to this version of the report, the second round of it. Basically, we looked at can the Woolerton Bridge as is pass flood flows. That was the first question. And the second question was, does Willerton Bridge cause erosive conditions downstream? The answer to the second question was yes. The flood plain goes from wide, goes through Willerton Bridge and is constricted, and that speeds up the water. And we discussed in the report that that leads to a erosion of a flood debris source right through there. The answer to the first question is also yes. It can pass all the flood flows through it with a sufficient amount of freeboard, which is basically the height between the bottom of the bridge and the water surface elevation at the flood flows we looked at. And so that is, there is one more flood mitigation solution between Main Street and Elm Street, is that method to ensure that the flood flows that we're getting out at the Elm Street Bridge here didn't happen. So there's more detail in the report. We basically look at widening the channel and passing that widened channel through a wider Elm Street Bridge, and that all of that water goes away through there, so we don't see any overtopping of the channel there. So any questions on Steel Brook?
Didn't we also add the depositional feature at the end of Steel Brook?
Yes, yes, that was another part that was added. Let me see which exhibit shows it best. Let's go here. So a depositional feature is an area where debris, mostly gravels, cobbles, this size and that size, settle out and start to build a gravel bar. You have some of those all up and down the West Branch all over the place. And the concern is if that gravel bar can get to a size such that it could obstruct water that is moving downstream. So in this case, the gravel bar is being formed straight up here, and that gravel bar is potentially impinging flood flow that's going down through here. And generally the rule of thumb is that if it's all about the width ratio. So if the width of the obstruction is close to the width of the floodplain width, then you'll get a higher bump up in water surface elevation, meaning that the gravel bar is actually a true obstruction. But if that gravel bar, for example, is only 100 feet across and your floodplain is, say, 3,000 feet across, that gravel bar is just a small blip in the flood conveyance, so it's not much of the obstruction. So in this instance, we took a look at, well, what if we remove that gravel bar and opened up more of like what a typical unobstructed profile would be on the West Branch, and there was some reduction. I don't have that number off the top of my head, it's in the report, but there was some reduction through there, not a significant amount to really reduce a lot of damage, but there was some reduction in that. The caveat with gravel bar scalping or dredging or those kind of things is that that feature is going to reform again, so it's going to have to be maintained. It's another maintenance thing, and often DEC frowns upon that kind of activity unless we have evidence that shows that this is a really important activity to our resiliency of flood through here. So that was another part that was looked at in Steel Brook. Okay. Any other questions on Steel Brook?
On the Clearwater, on the bridge out here on Elm Street, is that the current clear depth we have, or is that take from the top down to the bottom of that box culvert, which is well below the gravel level now?
That is existing conditions when we went out and measured it. So what
That's
we
current conditions.
well, that about a year ago. So that's not as designed. It's more of just what's out there now. It's a snapshot in time, which this all is, and we'll get to another study area where that actually is a very important factor. But it is just, it's a snapshot in time. And then even, I forget what was the difference between when This model was done, which I believe is in 2010. Oh, no, it was after what? It was after.
Stillbrook?
Yeah.
Stillbrook was 13.
13? Okay.
12, 13, something.
Yeah,
I think it's early 13.
it was response after the tropical storm in 11. But I forget the change in channel bed elevation from when it was surveyed in 2013 and when we went out last year. Meredith Street. This is another, this is a really important one because this is a place where people get frequently flooded. There is, basically when it rains, people's driveway gets washed out, buildings get wet, etc. And so this is an exhibit of public participation. These were data points that we collected from our first and second public meetings where people said, these homes get wet, they get damaged, it's due to the stormwater drainage system, come fix it. So what we talked about here in the report is we modeled the existing conditions, and because we went out and measured as best as we could the stormwater system, which started up at Cutback Road, went underground, and then crossed over by the yellow house right here, and then ran down this way. And then there's some more contributions coming in off from here, and then eventually tied into the DOT network down by here. So we modeled that, and the model results were really close to what we saw in reality. Basically, I think it was an inch rainstorm, which happens a couple times a year. We'll start getting these houses, some of the houses wet, and then we decided to use the DOT standard design threshold for resizing the stormwater network through here, which is the 10-year return interval storm. So basically what that means is that the DOT network down here is designed to a capacity to pass the 10-year rainfall event. And that's pretty standard for their work. Often, if we exceed that design standard, that more rain comes in design, you start to see surcharging out of manholes. Everyone gets excited, and kids like to play in that. And so what we decided to do is match that design standard here from what we did up here. We took two approaches. One, a minimalist approach, which is to put a 10-year design storm system and run it right down the highway because that would not require many easements or anything like that. Then we took a more, the other approach, trying to upgrade the system in place as best as we could, which increased pipe sizes, replaced basically buried channels, and ran that through there. And this is an example of where the BCA score really didn't reflect the need of the community when it comes to flooding, because the BCA score was really low because the water depth over first floor elevations of these homes was only 2 or 3 inches, but 2 or 3 inches through a front door a couple times a year is really problematic. And this is one of my frustrations with the software, is that it just doesn't really capture the need of flood mitigation. So hence why we had the prioritization metric tool that then was able to describe why this particular mitigation solution is important, because it does impact community. It does have a water quality problem, because 2 or 3 inches over an unfinished basement or any kind of pollution could grab some water pollution and bring it down. So that's in the report as well. There's 2 mitigation solutions for Meredith Street. Any questions on that one? Okay. This is Elk Creek. So we originally looked at any kind of flooding hazards from the west branch that were here, and also from Elk Creek proper, and there really wasn't any. Meaning there was no buildings that were inundated at the 100-year event. But this is Elk Creek Road right through here, and there's a small tributary that comes right through a arch culvert right through this way, and that is prone to debris blocking, that road in particular. And when that happens, floodwaters pop up and over Elk Creek and run through these two homes. Again, these are publicly collected data that we got from our public meeting. So we ran this solution through an existing conditions model. I was able to show like, yep, like a 50% obstruction. We got flooding up and over through the homes. And then we looked at increasing the size of the culvert using the same size of the obstruction area. And the culvert was sized to pass, I think it was the 50-year flood or something like that through there. So it's just a wider culvert through there, and that will be able to keep those homes from getting damaged. And then our final, well, before I talk about this one, there is a little bit of a blurb on the Little Delaware River. We looked at inundation hazards in the Little Delaware River, and the only thing that was getting wet was the golf course, which I hear certain members of the Soil and Water Conservation District like to utilize frequently. But outside of that, we didn't really see any.
Didn't we suggest moving hole number 2? Can't seem to stay out of stream.
So we decided that there wasn't, and we also looked at, I forget the name of the road, Andes Road, is that it? That runs, or Murray Hill Road, that runs over Little Delaware River?
Thompson Crossroad.
What's that?
Thompson Crossroad.
Thompson's Crossroad. We looked at that in terms of inundation through there and determined that that wasn't a flood hazard because there was a bypass around that. So the Little Delaware did not have any notable flooding hazards there, so there was not a mitigation solution presented for the Little Delaware. And then our final one is Plattner Brook, and this is where the snapshot in time comes into play. So this is the modeling that we did using survey data that was collected last year at the 100-year flood event. And what would happen earlier is that the plants that are down here on this side of the road were getting wet when floodwaters popped up and ripped through this cornfield and came down County Road 16 and right through the plants through there. And so what the proposed investigation was, all right, well, does that happen again? How frequently does it happen? And what are some of our mitigation solutions? So when we went out, we surveyed, took cross sections through here on the creek, and you can see this is a water depth map at the 100-year event. So the red colors are water depths greater than 6 feet, green is 4 to 6 feet, and blue is 0 to 1. And for the most part, all of Plattner Brook is contained within the channel. Now that model was also run with the new proposed bridge dimensions that were through here. So we're really comparing what's the existing conditions out there now. And so we couldn't replicate what the flooding event that happened that damaged the buildings over here. There's a couple reasons for that. One, there could have been down cutting, which means that before the storm event, the channel bed elevation was here, and so you had it, if the stream bank elevations were here, you had a lot of water that could pop up and overtop the stream banks. Down cutting is when this changes, so now you have a lower riverbed elevation, which keeps the water from overtopping during a similar sized flood event, which is good for flood inundation in the short term, but when that ends up happening, you get a lot of erosion, and that can cause a lot of other problems downstream. So we looked at that and ran the modeling, the numbers for that, but did not find anything in there. We did note that other ways that the flooding could have happened and popped out of Plattner Brook and run through the plants is that there could have been log debris jams that had done it, but we didn't see any signs of those out there, so we were unsure that if a log jam did plug up parts of Plattner Brook, that was the cause of the flooding there. Any questions on anything so far? Because we're almost at the end, and then we'll talk about next steps. So this is item 3 on the agenda. And this is the precursor for the final roadmap, which is chapter 11 that has not been written yet. So this is the summary of all of the mitigation solutions we looked at. Now, these are the mitigation solutions. There's some commonalities between some of them that we call just independent resolutions, such as community planning about where to identify particular parcels that may need to be relocated, or if like there's some areas where the village or town wants to buy back from DEP because of it's the best area to put some of the structures, some of the buildings are being moved. So those are something separate that is talked about in chapter 10. But this is really where the rubber hits the road in terms of summarizing the work. So in the table, again, you have these plan IDs, which all tie back to the individual chapters in the report. You have a description of those plans, and then the prioritization score. So this is, that number right there comes out of number 2 on the agenda item. So for instance, number 1, just coincidentally, has a prioritization score of 32. Number 6 has a prioritization score of 30, so on and so forth. And just as a comparison's sake, that you can see the benefit to cost ratio was also included, just to tell the reviewer that, hey, well, this, where is it here? There. So, the 24 is, this is the prioritization score for those, and it's not, we added that up, and so to be able to, but you can see that this is still a priority in the listing because we had a prioritization score that was actually calculated for it, and despite the fact that the BCR was so low. So that's one of the benefits for adding the prioritization scores up. So this would be the foundation for the implementation plan, which is in chapter 11. So when you're reviewing this report, really, maybe even start here and say, okay, what is my highest prioritization score? Number 32. What does that mean? Remove burn near the price chopper. You can go back into the report and read number 1 if that's of interest. Or do the same thing for number 6 here. If we were to, what's this LFA mitigation plan number 1 and lower floodplain to 2-year floodplain elevation of Depot Street, remove 2 outbuildings, what's that? You can go back into the report and read about number 6. And you can see why the BCR was really big and the prioritization score was relatively strong. And so this is what we would do in chapter 11, is basically say this is where we need to start in terms of implementation plans for flood resiliency. So this is really this will be the 3rd draft. Once we get comments back from the boards about which mitigation solutions should be, their prioritization scores, what should we tweak, what should we leave the same. Any questions so far on this? This is really that draft final product of where we are.
We understand what removing some of the outbuildings or sheds would lower the floodplain. Removing the SUNY ball field, how does that lower it?
Good question. Bear with me and I can pull up an exhibit right now. What I'm doing is opening up the report itself, and it's really thin, 137 pages. So let me pick that Okay. So the question was, what does removing the SUNY ball fields accomplish? This is a terraced and floodplain terrain map, or TAF for short. What this does is compares the surrounding landforms to the river elevation. Why is that important? Well, when rivers flood, they tend to like to spill out onto a floodplain to release their energy. When that happens, typically you find rivers that are better in balance or not eroding. Also, you'll get better results for floodplain conveyance through that way once you get active floodplains. The TAF map is an exhibit that really helps pinpoint areas in the floodplain that are being impinged upon or constricted. So the TAF map here is different colors. The brown here is elevations that are 12 feet or greater above the river elevation, which is in these deep blue colors here. So the blue you see is at the water surface if you were to walk out to the West Branch today. Areas in brown are 12 feet above that. So if your floodwater is going down, you're not going to overtop an area in brown. Whereas in areas in lighter blue are really close to the river elevation. So those would be, you could spill out very easily into a floodplain. The reason why these are advantageous to be able to identify constrictions is because regardless of water depths, the landforms are, the way to identify how tall that landmass is. So here we have areas of light tan on the upstream end. This is the West Branch, the flow is going this direction. We have areas of tan up through here, which is areas closer to the water surface elevation. And then down here you can see that there's some more areas of tan through here, and then some little bit lighter browns. I think we're getting down into the price drop area here. So what this TAF map shows is that here you have low-lying elevations or moderately low-lying elevations. Then you go whack right into these really tall features, and you can see how abrupt they are in terms of elevation difference between the river water surface elevation and this. So if we remove these, and here the lines in blue and the lines in red are profile lines along the riverbank, which associate the red one is here, the blue one is here, and that black line represents what we would lower the SUNY ball fields down to. And when we put that into the hydraulic model, these black ones here are the actual cross-sections that go in there. We can see the impact in terms of floodwater reduction when we remove those high features out of there. So we found that there was some reduction in water surface elevations. If those were removed, those floodwater reductions were a little muted because of the high impact of what's really downstream. So even if we lower these down to turn these from dark browns to light tans, we still have some pretty high terrace features downstream. So we don't get a lot of benefit from removing those. And that's one reason why in in that table 71 there that we were just looking at, that was not moved on to a benefit to cost analysis, because the anticipated cost was a lot higher than the value that we'd get from mitigating that, from doing that mitigation solution. And one reason for the mitigation cost is that there were some conversations that those used to be dumps at some point in time several decades ago. So we thought that getting into that would add a lot of cost in terms of disposal of potentially hazardous material. And that was a comment that came up in the last flood commission meeting, and we did some hunting into some aerial photos, and the aerial photos showed that it's hard to see if it was actually a dumping site, but there was active work going on in that site, and the area was completely wide open, and there was some, it looked like dumping features that were there.
So George, if it says not calculated, does that mean that it's not worth looking at anymore?
Not worth looking at anymore. There are, for the most part, I'm gonna say with a caveat. Now, this planning and relocation number 8 here, it's not calculated because it wasn't run through a hydraulic model, so we didn't get any results. But those will be solutions that we'll put into the implementation strategy, which is in chapter 11.